Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Benedetta Rosartoli, and it is a privilege for me today, the 28th of November 2025, to preside over the item 6 plenary of the Universal Periodic Review. I warmly welcome you all. I extend my sincere apologies in advance for any mispronunciations of names that may occur. Before we begin our agenda, I would like to invite Madam Vice President, Ms. Francesca Crescente, to reiterate the operational guidelines for today's item 6, along with the rules of conduct to be followed during the plenary. Madam Vice President, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. For the presentation of the general outcome of the working group sessions, we kindly ask the representative from the state announced by the President to stand up, walk to the podium, and wait for the timer to start to begin their presentation. During your presentation, please refer to other delegates as fellow delegates of, and refer to the President of the session as Madam President. We would also like to remind participants that the use of mobile phones during the formal session is prohibited. Please take note that commenting will take place from your seats. I kindly remind all the delegates to raise their placard card to speak and to only take the floor when instructed to do so. Additionally, delegations that wish to speak are highly encouraged to raise their placards in the first call for comments for the sake of organization. Furthermore, final remarks will take place from your seats. Delegates are asked to stand up to deliver them after they've been recognized by the Presidency. Thank you in advance for your adherence to these rules. I give the floor back to Madam President. Madam President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I hereby declare this session of the Human Rights Council open. We shall now open the item 6 agenda with the adoption of the Universal Periodic Review Working Group outcomes of the states of Australia, Denmark, Lebanon, Rwanda, Singapore, and Trinidad and Tobago. Before we proceed, let me briefly recall the modalities of the UPR segment of the plenary. In this regard, I would like to refer to the Human Rights Council Resolution 1621, to which the Council strongly rejects any act of intimidation or reprisal against individuals and groups who cooperate with the United Nations and its representatives in human rights cases. I urge the states to prevent and ensure adequate protection against such acts. Furthermore, I would like to recall, as provided for in Council Resolution 5.1 and 1621, that all recommendations are an integral part of the outcome document. Accordingly, and in line with paragraph 32 of Annex 5 to Resolution 5.1, the state under review needs to clearly communicate its position on all recommendations, either by indicating that it supports or that it notes the recommendation concerned. In addition, all interventions made during the UPR plenary segment shall focus on the outcome document and not focus on debates that took place during the working group session. I would therefore like to appeal to all delegations to adhere to the rules established by Resolutions 5.1 and 1621. I would also like to take this opportunity to emphasize the important role that national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations play in the UPR process. Their participation in the deliberation of the Council within the framework of the UPR segment provides additional clarification of issues under discussion. Through the Universal Periodic Review mechanism, international cooperation between states and civil society organizations is enhanced and implemented to ensure long-lasting peace and well-being for all. In conclusion, I wish to highlight that, as emphasized by the United Nations Secretary-General in his reports, the UPR recommendations provide an important basis for achieving greater results both in the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and human rights protection at the national and international levels. We will now start with the consideration of the outcome of the Commonwealth of Australia based on the reports made by the Working Group of the UPR and its addendum. These documents, along with the additional information that the state under review will provide now, will be adopted by the Council to standardize the decision. Now, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Alessandra Doria, Assistant Secretary to the Multilateral Policy Division of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, to present the general outcome of the working group sessions. Your Excellency, I invite you to take the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished Secretary, member of civil societies, and esteemed fellow delegates. Ladies and gentlemen, as a representative of the Commonwealth of Australia, it's a great honor to take the floor today on the occasion of the adoption of the recommendations addressed to our country during the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. The Commonwealth of Australia wishes to express its sincere appreciation to Madam President, Madam Vice President, and the Secretary for their invaluable support throughout this process. We also extend our gratitude to all the delegations for their cooperation in an objective and non-politicized manner, driven by our engagement in promotion and protection of human rights in Australia. We also thank the Troika, namely the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, for their precious cooperation, time, and dedication. Furthermore, we recognize the meaningful contributions made by fellow delegates, whose recommendations are intended to strengthen human rights in our country. Drawing down the recommendation that Australia received, we intend to underline the Commonwealth commitment. Australia accepted 6 recommendations, and in these 6 months, Australia showed effort in starting to implement them. Australia accepted the recommendation from Denmark and Trinidad and Tobago concerning the minimum age of criminal responsibility and detention, especially for children. Australia, in order to address these recommendations, activated the Standing Council of Attorneys General, with the aim of creating an harmonized justice system between the states of the Commonwealth. Australia is working to expand the application of justice, age of criminal responsibility, Legislation Amendment Act of 2023, while developing alternative measures to detention with a special attention on minors. Australia accepted the recommendation of Singapore addressing the gender pay gap. Australia is intended to make equality substantial, not only formal, through a mechanism of transparency applied to the enterprises and economic incentives. Furthermore, Australia also accepted 2 recommendations of Rwanda. In response to concerns regarding Indigenous women, the Commonwealth continues to foster their participation in decision-making processes through an Indigenous advancement strategy that aims to prioritize organizations with at least the 50% of feminine leadership. In addition, related to the recommendation regarding the procedures of asylum seekers, Australia is strengthening transparency through annual reports. The focus is the protection of children with the formulation of a first child approach to migration policy with the aim of prioritize unaccompanied minors and not separating families. Finally, Australia accepted 1 recommendation for Lebanon related to the right of health, especially in vulnerable and remote communities. Australia is increasing the funding of the Remote Area Health Corps to enhance access to essential health services. By accepting this recommendation, Australia reaffirms its effort in creating a society in which equality is tangible and no one is left behind, especially those belonging to vulnerable groups, such as women, Indigenous women, children, and asylum seekers. Madam President, we, as representatives of Commonwealth of Australia, reiterate our strong commitment in the Universal Periodic Review process. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We will now leave the floor for comments. I now invite the Australian Human Rights Commission to take the floor for comments. Mr. Mohammed bin Tariq, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. On behalf of the Australian Human Rights Commission, I extend our sincere gratitude to all delegates for the rigorous engagement This collaborative spirit is very essential for the UPR. We welcome the Australian government's acceptance of several crucial recommendations. The commitment to raising the minimum age of criminal responsibility of at least 14 years, supported by Denmark and Trinidad and Tobago, makes a historic step for the children's right in Australia. We also encouraged by the acceptance of Singapore's recommendation on the gender pay gap and Rwanda's recommendation on indigenous women's leadership and protection of child asylum seekers. The specific outcomes underscore the persistent pattern progress in some areas and constantly undermine the stagnation in others. The implementation gap seems to form a foundational weakness in the absence of Federal Human Rights Act. The Commission stands to work with the government to implement the accepted recommendation in a good faith and to reconsider its position those noted. We will monitor this process independently and rigorously. We urge the international community to remain engaged. Your continued security, not imposition, but a partnership, is essential to holding all nations, including Australia, accountable to our shared human rights ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bin Tariq. I will now give the floor to the observer states to hear their comments about the review of the Commonwealth of Australia. For this segment, please raise your place card if you wish to comment and wait for your delegation to be called out. The list of speakers will follow the alphabetical order. Each state will have 1 minute. I now give the floor to the delegation of Lebanon. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
The Lebanese Republic welcomes, thank you, Madam President. The Lebanese Republic welcomes the progress made by the Commonwealth of Australia since its last review. Our delegation specifically welcomes the accepted recommendation to strengthen the access to healthcare for everyone, including vulnerable and remote regions. Lebanon encourages the increase of funding of the remote area health corps, the retention of bonuses for medical staff working in rural and indigenous areas, and the extension of the Closing the Gap health plan. Lebanon remains concerned, however, with a lack of progress or mention of consideration to ratify the human rights instrument that Australia has yet to. Specifically, our delegation urges Australia to ratify the International Convention on the Protocol on the protection of the rights of all migrant workers and members of their families in order to address further concerns and issues related to the treatment of migrants. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Are there further comments? I give the floor to the delegation of Singapore.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, fellow delegates. Singapore thanks the delegation of Australia for their presentation in this UPR. We welcome Australia's acceptance of our recommendation on improving pay equality and enhancing women's economic security. We note with some regret that our recommendation concerning measures to address elder abuse was not accepted. We hope this important issue will receive due attention in Australia's ongoing policy considerations. Singapore remains willing to share our relevant experience in social service and elder protection. We wish Australia every success in continuing to implement the accepted recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Are there any further comments? I give the floor to the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Madam President. For the Commonwealth of Australia, Trinidad and Tobago commends the advancement with regard to harmonizing the legislation on the age of criminal responsibility across the country. We further commend the efforts made to reduce the incarceration of young children charged with minor offenses by phasing out police watch houses and adopting a restorative justice approach. Additionally, Trinidad and Tobago expresses concern about the lack of complementary measures to mitigate the de facto discrimination of First Nation children in incarceration rates. Finally, Trinidad and Tobago regrets that no advancement has been made on policies and measures taken to improve public funding, policies for green energy, and climate mitigation measures, despite Australia's noting of the recommendation reminding them of their emissions targets and responsibilities as a developed nation for a just climate transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Further comments? I now give the floor to the delegation of Rwanda. Can we get a microphone to the delegation of Rwanda? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, and esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. Rwanda warmly welcomes the Working Group report on Australia and thanks the delegation for its constructive engagement. We commend Australia for the spirit of cooperation shown in reviewing the recommendation received and for the detailed addendum outlining implementation steps. Rwanda appreciates Australia's acceptance of our recommendations on promoting Indigenous women's participation in leadership and on strengthening safeguards for asylum seekers, especially children. We welcome the measures described, including proposed reforms to the Indigenous advancement strategies and steps towards transparent and child-centered asylum procedures. We also take note of Australia's decision to consider further our recommendation on enhancing mechanism for refugee status determination, and we encourage continued efforts in this important area. We wish Australia every success in implementation phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the international non-governmental organizations for any comments. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait to be given the floor to speak. Please note that you will have 1 minute to speak. Can you raise them? Okay, thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Friends of the Earth International.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, honorable delegates and representatives of member states. Friends of the Earth International wishes to thank the delegation of Australia for its engagement throughout the review process, and we also know that Australia's position on the extension of the North West Shelf project. But our concern regarding long-term environmental impacts remain profound and urgent. The expansion of one of the world's largest fossil fuel projects, responsible for millions of tons of emission each year, threaten irreversible deterioration of Murujuga's ancient rock art. So, Friends of the Earth International, along with the Australian Human Rights Commission, will continue to closely monitor the Buru Peninsula. The time for responsible and chance-based decision-making is now, and Friends of the Earth International invites the Government of Australia to reconsider the recommendation made in the previous UPR session and to take into consideration the help Denmark has already offered to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to Human Dignity Trust.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear Madam President, dear Madam Vice President, distinguished delegates, honorable guests, the Human Dignity Trust would like to commend all of your efforts in facilitating and implementing recommendations to the improvement of human rights, particularly for LGBT individuals. We would like to commend Australia for the participation in the 8th cycle of the Model UPR and are thankful for the collaboration and are hoping to continue working together in changing laws to changing lives. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Next is the representative of the International Alliance of Women. You may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Honorable Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The International Alliance of Women commends Australia's wide-ranging institutional mechanisms for gender equality and for accepting recommendations related to the gender pay gap and Indigenous women in leadership. We would like to emphasize the need to enact tangible measures addressing the systematic biases in law enforcement that lead to Indigenous Australians and other people of color being subject to a disproportionate amount of violence and incarceration. We also urge Australia to allocate dedicated funding and adopt measurable targets under the Closing the Gap framework to halve the rate of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and children by 2031. The International Alliance of Women stands ready to support Australia in advancing these measures to safeguard the rights, health, and lives of all women. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Now is the representative of International Refugee Assistance Project. You may now have the floor.
Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, fellow delegates, we thank Australia for its engagement in the UPR cycle and commend all states for their engagement and consideration. We note with appreciation the several recommendations relevant to refugee protection were raised during the working group session. In particular, we welcome Australia's acceptance of measures to strengthen safeguards for asylum seekers, especially children, and its willingness to further examine improvements to refugee status determination procedures. However, we remain concerned that Australia has again noted the recommendation to ratify outstanding core human rights instruments, including those protecting migrant workers and their families. These treaties are essential to ensuring comprehensive rights protection. We urge Australia to move beyond consideration and take meaningful steps towards full ratification and implementation in line with its commitment to human dignity and international standards. Moreover, we urge Australia to address persistent concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? This concludes the list of speakers and stakeholders. I now give the floor back to the representative of the Commonwealth of Australia for their final remarks. Your Excellency, you have 2 minutes. You may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished Secretary, and esteemed fellow delegates. Firstly, I would like to respond to the concern of fellow delegates and members of civil societies. Australia recognized the importance of the topics that you brought up during the previous phases of Universal Periodic Review, but decided to take a different approach and noted a lot of recommendation because Australia needs coordination between the states and the coordination process needs time. So in order to avoid to end up accepting a recommendation without implement them, we decided to just note it. But the country will put effort to implement them. Secondly, I would like to respond to the concern related to climate change. Australia recognizes significant impacts of climate change, and the country is already committed to reducing its emission by collaborating with organizations such as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. However, the country sees the possibility of coexistence between arts and industrial activities and territories. Australia takes this opportunity to point out its commitment to the Universal Periodic Review, considered by the country the most efficient instrument to build international collaboration that aims to harmonize, promote, and protect human rights. The country thanks the Commission, Madam President, Madam Vice President, and distinguished Secretary, and thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Alessandra Doria for her comments and for the State of Australia's participation throughout the UPR process. I now suggest that the Council should adopt a decision on the outcome of the UPR of the Commonwealth of Australia. Are there any objections? I see none. The outcome is adopted. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, we shall now continue with item 6 of the UPR with the adoption of the working group reports of the Kingdom of Denmark. It is with pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ioannis Tseris, Special Advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Faroe Islands, to present the general outcome of the working group sessions. Your Excellency, I invite you to take the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Delegates, it is an honor to take the floor on behalf of the Kingdom of Denmark under item 6. I am pleased to present Denmark's addendum to the report of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review. At the outset, allow me to reaffirm Denmark's strong commitment to the UPR. We view this mechanism as a cornerstone of international cooperation and as an opportunity to strengthen human rights protection. Guided by this spirit, the government carefully considered all 11 recommendations addressed. In line with our established approach, Denmark accepted recommendations where a concrete follow-up is feasible before our next review or where implementation is already underway. In this cycle, Denmark accepted 9 recommendations and noted 2. Madam President, allow me to highlight the steps Denmark has taken during the 6 months period since the working group session. In response to Australia's recommendation to strengthen language education in Greenland, Denmark has worked closely with Greenland to establish a technical working group on education. Denmark has begun expanding teacher recruitment programs, improving access to pedagogical materials, and investing in culturally relevant educational content. Turning to Lebanon's recommendations, Denmark continues to strengthen its human rights-based approach to counter-terrorism. Updated interagency guidelines are being prepared to ensure strong safeguards in preventing operations. Human rights modules are being integrated into the training curriculum for security personnel. In implementing Rwanda's recommendations, Denmark has intensified efforts to promote gender equality and reduce the gender pay gap. Updated workplace guidelines on preventing sexual harassment and ensuring employer responsibility have been initiated across ministries. A standardized national model for handling harassment complaints is being introduced, ensuring consistent, confidential, and victim-centered procedures. Denmark has also advanced inclusion for persons with disabilities by considering the establishment of a cross-ministerial disability inclusion task force aimed at harmonizing accessibility standards and strengthening reasonable accommodation in public services. Singapore's recommendations on digital safety and equal pay have likewise guided meaningful action. Cooperation between the National Police and the Danish Security and Intelligence Service has been enhanced to improve monitoring of illegal speech on online platforms. In addition, Denmark is conducting consultations with social partners on the implementation of the EU Pay Transparency Directive, including consideration of extending pay gap reporting obligations to smaller enterprises and strengthening protection for migrant women in the labor market. From Trinidad and Tobago, Denmark accepted the recommendation to further protect marginalized groups, including Greenlandic women, and to continue efforts to neutralize gender pay gap. Victim support services are being expanded, targeting minority and Greenlandic women. Public sector training programs are being updated to reinforce respectful treatment, non-discrimination, and protection from gender-based violence. Excellencies, regarding the 2 noted recommendations, Denmark maintains its position. We do not foresee repealing Regulation L38 or Section 6A of the Act on Policing, as these provisions operate under clear safeguards and remain proportionate. Furthermore, Denmark does not intend to ratify the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers, given its lack of differentiation between legally residing workers and those without legal status. Madam President, fellow delegates, the Kingdom of Denmark remains committed to transparency, constructive dialogue, and genuine follow-up. The actions taken during the past 6 months demonstrate our resolve to translate recommendations into practical progress. We will continue this work in close cooperation with civil society, national human rights institutions, social partners, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. We thank all delegations for their engagement and reaffirm Denmark's full support for the Universal Periodic Review as a mechanism for shared learning and collective advancement of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor for comments to the Danish Institute for Human Rights Senior Human Rights Advisor, Ms. Ursa Pavsek. You have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Secretariat. Thank you. And fellow delegates. The Danish Institute of Human Rights thanks Denmark for its active engagement in this review and for inclusive preparation for its national report. We value constructive dialogue with all parts of the kingdom. We welcome the accepted recommendations, many of which align with our core mandates. In particular, we appreciate Australia's recommendations to strengthen Inuit language education through culturally fluent teachers and Greenlandic designed curricula. Linguistic rights are essential for equality and the well-being of Greenlandic children, and we encourage adequate resources for implementation. We also welcome recommendations from Rwanda, Singapore, and Trinidad and Tobago on gender equality, racial discrimination, and disability rights. Continued efforts to close the gender pay gap, strengthen representation, including for minority and Greenlandic women, and improve responses to gender-based violence remain vital. Similarly, ensuring accessible education, community support, and full reasonable accommodation is key for disability inclusion. We note Singapore's emphasis on digital governance and hate speech prevention, which is important as ethnic minorities continue to face discrimination. We likewise welcome Lebanon's call for stronger anti-discrimination legislation and stress the need for improved reporting, enforcement, and comprehensive protections. We regret that Denmark noted recommendations on repealing Regulation L38 and on ratifying the Migrant Worker Convention. Regulation L38 continues to raise concerns about differential treatment, and we encourage reassessment of its human rights compatibility. Finally, we recognize progress on children's rights, gender-based violence, disability strategies, and social inclusion. But sustained political commitment is essential to ensure equal protection across the entire kingdom. The Danish Institute for Human Rights remains committed to supporting implementation and monitoring progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavsek. I will now give the floor to the observer states to hear their comments regarding the review of the Kingdom of Denmark. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait for your delegation to be called out. We will start with the delegation of Australia. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Fellow delegates, Australia commends the Kingdom of Denmark for accepting our recommendation and for the concrete steps taken to strengthen language education in Greenland. Australia also encourages continued efforts to support the systematic integration of Inuit language across health, social, and other essential services. As a country proud of its own indigenous cultures and languages, Australia stands ready to share relevant experience and support Denmark and Greenland in developing culturally informed policies and implementation strategies. Australia also encourages broader efforts within Denmark to raise awareness and understanding of Inuit language and culture, to reinforce progress made in Greenland, and to strengthen inclusion across the kingdom as a whole. Australia remains concerned, however, that Regulation L38 and Section 6A of the Act on Policing may have a discriminatory effect in practice. We therefore encourage. Thank you, fellow delegates.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now is the turn of the delegation of Lebanon. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The Lebanese Republic welcomes the progress of the Kingdom of Denmark in anti-terrorism measures and expects to see a greater expansion on such policies beyond guidelines and training curriculums. It is important to note that all such policies should emphasize equal treatment for all and non-discriminatory behavior to minority groups. Lebanon also welcomes the accepted recommendation to reinforce legislation against discrimination, but would further remark the need for a comprehensive framework to protect against racism, biases, discrimination against persons with disabilities, women, children, or migrants. We welcome the attempts for gender equality legal amendments, as well as the public information campaigns on equal treatment, but we urge the Kingdom of Denmark to consider adopting an expansive anti-discrimination law that would cover elements such as housing, workplace, healthcare, and education, to name a few. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Rwanda. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. Rwanda warmly welcomes the presentation of Denmark's working group report and addendum and appreciates the constructive engagement demonstrated throughout the process. We commend Denmark for accepting the vast majority of recommendations, including those put forward by Rwanda on advancing gender equality and strengthening inclusive policies for persons with disabilities. We also note with appreciation the concrete steps already outlined, such as the implementation of a standardized model for preventing and addressing harassment and the ongoing cross-ministerial work on disability inclusion. Rwanda further welcomes Denmark's continued commitment to combating discrimination, protecting vulnerable groups, and enhancing gender pay gap transparency. We welcome Denmark's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And I now give the floor to the delegation of Singapore. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, and distinguished delegates. Singapore thanks Denmark's implementation of our two recommendations. We note the enhanced cooperation between police and security services on online hate speech, and the formal consultation on the EU Pay Transparency Directive, and improved wage transparency and fair treatment, including for migrant women. Support global workplace dignity and equal opportunity. Singapore encouraged continued focus on women's economic empowerment, particularly for those from minority backgrounds, and values the ongoing exchange of experiences in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates, Trinidad and Tobago welcomes the Kingdom of Denmark for the advancements in protecting the rights of marginalized and minority groups, such as persons with disabilities and Greenlandic women. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago specifically encourages the establishment of the Disability Inclusion Task Force. Trinidad and Tobago further remarks that the Kingdom of Denmark should ideally provide a clear plan and timeline for the implementation of the updated national civil service training programs. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago would be pleased to offer its support in the operationalization of the said training, specifically building on its own gender-responsive institutional skill-building experience. Finally, Trinidad and Tobago commends the holistic nature of policies introduced to address the gender pay gap by the Kingdom of Denmark, notably its commitment to evidence-based monitoring and intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now give the floor to the international non-governmental organizations for any comments. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait to be given the floor to speak. Please note that you will have 1 minute to speak. I now give the floor to the delegation of Human Dignity Trust.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished delegates, honorable guests, and respected peers. The Human Dignity Trust would like to commend all of your efforts in facilitating and implementing recommendations to the improvement of human rights, particularly for LGBT individuals. We would like to commend Denmark for the participation in the 8th cycle of the Model UPR, and are thankful for the collaboration and are hoping to continue working together in changing laws to change lives. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the International Alliance of Women.
Thank you, Madam President, Honorable Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The International Alliance of Women welcomes Denmark's long-standing commitment to gender equality and its accepted recommendations, particularly on extending gender pay gap reporting to include smaller enterprises and minority groups. However, blind spots remain in ensuring equal access to reproductive and gender-based violence services across the kingdom. Women and girls in Greenland and the Faroe Islands still face barriers to reproductive health care, such as timely access to safe abortion, contraception, and confidentiality. Denmark also records persistently high levels of violence against women. Without a coordinated national strategy, prevention, early risk identification, and survivor protection remain limited. We urge Denmark to implement the abortion reform fully in Greenland and the Faroe Islands, ensuring accessible, affordable, youth-friendly reproductive health services for all women, including migrants, and adopt a fully funded national femicide reduction plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Are there any further comments? I now give the floor to the International Refugee Assistance Project.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and distinguished delegates. We thank Denmark for its engagement in this UPR cycle. However, as an organization working closely with refugees and migrants, we must express our concern that two crucial recommendations raised during the working group session, those from Lebanon considering ratification of the Convention of the Protection of All Migrant Workers, from Australia on revising stigmatizing terminology in the ghetto legislation, were merely noted. We strongly believe these issues directly impact the dignity, inclusion, and rights of all migrant and refugee communities and must urgently be addressed. Thus, while we appreciate that these recommendations were discussed, we regret that Denmark has not committed to concrete steps in these areas. We urge Denmark to reconsider its position and work towards stronger protection that uphold equality, safeguard the rights of all, and foster truly inclusive societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Are there any further comments? This concludes the list of speakers and of the stakeholders. I now give the floor back to Denmark for its final remarks. Your Excellency, Mr. Zeris, you have 2 minutes. You may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished fellow delegates. Allow me to offer a brief closing statement on behalf of the Kingdom of Denmark under item 6. Denmark wishes to express its sincere appreciation for the constructive engagement of member states throughout this review cycle. The recommendations received and the dialogue that accompanied them continue to guide and strengthen our national efforts to promote and protect human rights. As outlined in our addendum, Denmark has accepted the majority of the recommendations presented during the working group session. We have already initiated early implementation steps in several areas highlighted today: strengthening equality and non-discrimination protection, addressing hate speech and online harm, protecting gender equality, and reducing the gender pay gap, advancing inclusion for persons with disabilities, and supporting language education and minority rights. These efforts reflect Denmark's commitment to ensuring that the UPR is not a one-day exercise, but an ongoing process of improvement and accountability. Denmark also reiterates its respect for the dialogue-based nature of the UPR. For the two recommendations we noted, we remain committed to continuing constructive engagements with the recommending states and with international partners, even when our legal or policy framework does not allow for acceptance at this time. Looking ahead, Denmark will maintain close cooperation with civil society, national human rights institutions, social partners, and local authorities as it continues to implement the accepted recommendations. We remain dedicated to transparency, partnership, and the rule of law, values at the core of both our national identity and the Council's work. Madam President, Denmark thanks all delegations for their contribution and reaffirms its full support for the Universal Periodic Review as a vital mechanism for mutual learning and collective progress. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Zeris, for his comments and for Denmark's participation throughout the UPR process. I now suggest that the Council should adopt a decision on the outcome of the UPR of the Kingdom of Denmark. Are there any objections? I see none. The outcome is now adopted. We shall now proceed with item 6 of the UPR with the adoption of the Working Group report of the Lebanese Republic. I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Mireya Rumi, who will be joining online, Director of the Department of International Organizations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigrants, to present the general outcome of the Working Group sessions. Your Excellency, I invite you to take the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Madam Vice President, Secretary, and fellow state delegates. Today, we meet for this final stage in the adoption of the report on Lebanon under the working group on the UPR 4 cycle. Lebanon discussed the report 6 months ago, and out of the recommendations presented, 12 were accepted and 6 were noted. We have accepted 66% of the recommendations. Madam President, Lebanon and its people are living through very difficult times due to the ongoing economic and financial crisis, limiting our possibilities to address these challenges adequately. In addition, the recent escalation of hostilities and airstrikes along the Blue Line, coupled with broader regional instability, have created a humanitarian and infrastructural emergency. We also have a serious crisis because of hosting approximately 1 million Syrian refugees in addition to Palestinian and other refugees, and this further complicates the situation. Despite this, our authorities are determined to carry out their international obligations, particularly in the field of human rights. Today, we renew the commitment to the UPR in spirit and letter. Having studied the recommendations, our state has accepted those that are feasible to implement before the next cycle. Among those which we have noted, some are very important and require an effort, but at this time we are not able to assure that we could eliminate obstacles to fulfill them. During these 6 months, we have started advancing towards implementing the 12 accepted recommendations. As a reminder, Law number 204 passed in 2020 already expanded the definition of domestic violence to include abuses committed during or because of marriage. In line with this law, during these 6 months, measures to combat domestic and gender-based violence expand through enhanced legal counseling, judicial training, strengthened reporting, and prosecution mechanisms. Nationwide awareness campaigns were also launched. Work to preserve the independence of the Beirut port explosion investigation progressed, with draft amendments to prevent abusive recusals and ensure accountability, alongside requests for additional oversight and expertise from international organizations. Parliament adopted reforms replacing criminal penalties with civil remedies in most defamation cases, following broad consultations on the new media law. Members of Parliament secured support for Lebanon's first unified civil personal status law, guaranteeing equal rights for women across religious communities. The law now awaits Constitutional Council review. The country continued implementing the Lebanon Crisis Response Plan, with UNHCR and UNRWA and initiated consultations with food security agencies to address rising needs. Lebanon has been discussing a safe facilities protocol to protect emergencies routes and integrate disaster risk mapping and resilience standards into hospital accreditation. Education initiative expanded financial support, e-learning, and school rehabilitation. Public investments in this sector will progressively increase, informed by annual vulnerability assessments on security conditions. Gender and disability inclusion efforts continued, including strengthened inclusive education planning and ongoing disability allowance support. Finally, the government adopted a new anti-corruption action plan, launched a unified digital transparency portal, and activated a real-time digital system to detect financial crimes, reinforcing transparency and accountability, especially in the public sector. Madam President, the authorities of Lebanon are determined to uphold the country's unique nature with the protection of fundamental freedoms and human rights. In conclusion, we would like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for their support given to Lebanon. We thank the Troika, Singapore, for their work within this process, and the friendly countries which participated in the debate. We thank them for their statements and their recommendations. Their contribution is greatly appreciated and shows the excellent relationship with the UPR process. Shukran jazilan.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to Ms. T. Huayan Lee, President of the Lebanese National Human Rights Commission, for comments. You have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, Thank you, Madam President, Vice President, and the distinguished fellow delegates. The delegates of the Lebanon's National Human Rights Commission welcome the constructive engagement of recommending states and appreciate the strong alignment of the final recommendations with priority we rate. At the same time, we note with concern that several key recommendations was not accepted. In this regard, we would respectfully like to ask, first, could the state clarify the reasons for noting the recommendation to abolish the kafala system and indicate whether it is considering any steps to revise or reform this framework in the future? And the second, could the state clarify the factors that led to the decision to note other recommendations related to gender equality, including those aimed at enacting the unified personal status laws, amending the national law to grant women equal rights, and withdrawing reservations to Article 92 and 60 of the CEDAW? And the third, could the state indicate whether it plans to legislate measures to safeguard refugee asylums, including provisions for residence, employment, and other related rights? And the last one is, does the state foresee any pathway to future alignment with international standards in human rights, including the abolition of the death penalties? In conclusions, we also wish to express our gratitude to our partner alliance, Friends of the Earth, and the International Alliance for Women and International Refugees Assistance Projects for their invaluable collaboration and thoughtful in this process. And one again, we also want to thank you for everyone to their engagement for this UPR circle. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now give the floor to the observer states to hear their comments about the review of the Lebanese Republic. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait for your delegation to be called out. I will start with the delegation of Australia. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Australia welcomes Lebanon engagement with the UPR process and congratulates Lebanon on accepting the recommendation to remove exceptions in national legislation that allow for rape within marriage and to explicitly criminalize marital rapes. Australia regrets, however, that 3 of our recommendations were noted. We recognize the significant challenges Lebanon is facing and understand that the current context may make deeper structural reforms difficult. Yet, it is precisely in moments of crisis that the protection of human rights becomes most vital. Australia remains committed to supporting Lebanon in its effort to uphold its human rights obligation, and we encourage continued dialogue and progress before the next UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now is the turn of the delegation of Denmark. Please, you may now have the floor.
Thank you. Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and distinguished fellow delegates, Denmark wishes to begin by expressing its sincere appreciations for cooperation extended by the Lebanese delegation and accepted the recommendations put forward by the Kingdom of Denmark regarding the Civil Code and Penal Code. In this regard, we would be grateful if Lebanon could elaborate on the specific concrete measures under consideration for the implementation of these accepted recommendations. However, we must also convey our regret that Lebanon was unable to accept our recommendations pertaining to the strengthening of the state's control over the use of force and the essential need to reinforce judicial independence. Given the fundamental nature of these issues for human rights, the rule of law, and regional stability, Denmark respectfully invites Lebanon to reconsider its position on these crucial matters. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Rwanda. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. Rwanda welcomes Lebanon's constructive engagement in the UPR and thanks the delegation for its addendum. Rwanda commends Lebanon for accepting the majority of recommendations and for the progress reported, including steps to strengthen protection against gender-based violence, ongoing work on media law reforms, and efforts to support vulnerable groups through social protection and food security programs, despite a very challenging national context. Rwanda also welcomes Lebanon's continued cooperation with UN agencies in delivering essential services and the measures taken to enhance transparency and anti-corruption mechanisms. We encourage Lebanon to further enhance cooperation with international partners to support its efforts in addressing the current economic and social challenges. Rwanda understands the sensitivities surrounding recommendations that were noted and encourages Lebanon to continue dialogue on these areas in line with the national priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Singapore. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished Secretariat, fellow delegates. Singapore welcomes Lebanon's acceptance of our recommendation concerning the safeguarding of medical and humanitarian facilities. We take note of the ongoing discussion to develop a safe facilities protocol. With regard to our recommendation on legislating for refugee asylum, we hope this important issue will continue to be considered in Lebanon's ongoing policy deliberations, and we encourage Lebanon to continue its efforts in digital governance and anti-corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Delegation of Trinidad and Tobago, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Trinidad and Tobago welcomes the Republic of Lebanon for the introduction of civil remedial measures for defamation to protect the right of freedom of speech, while still expressing concerns about the lack of precision for exceptions eligible for criminal prosecution. Furthermore, Trinidad and Tobago commends Lebanon's intention to increase funding for the rehabilitation of educational infrastructure and for the investment in alternative pedagogical pathways such as e-learning modalities. Trinidad and Tobago recognizes the constitutional difficulties faced by Lebanon in addressing gender-based discrimination and violence through legislative means. Still, Trinidad and Tobago encourages Lebanon to further strengthen complementary measures on the topic, such as support for women-centered NGOs. Finally, Trinidad and Tobago reiterates the importance of continuing efforts to abolish the kafala system, considering that political will and substantial societal support can only be obtained through sustained efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, I give the floor to the international non-governmental organizations for any comments. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait to be given the floor. Please note that you will have 1 minute to speak. I now give the floor to the delegation of Friends of the Earth International.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished Vice President, esteemed Secretary, honorable delegates and representatives of the member states. Friends of the Earth International wants to profoundly thank the delegation of Lebanon for its cooperation in adopting the recommendation proposed by Rwanda on food safety. We also show true gratitude to Rwanda, and we honor the commitment of the National Human Rights Commission to achieve this goal. It was essential to work all together, and we couldn't be prouder of the work that we have done. But as we already discussed, funding gaps still delay a full implementation. And therefore, we encourage Lebanon expanding already existing financial partnership with IFA and with the Global Agriculture and Food Security Programs. Moreover, we suggest Lebanon to consider constructing bilateral agreements with development agencies, such as the Germany Agency for International Cooperation. We truly show our support to your national plans, and we value the country's dedication to advancing human rights despite the challenges it faces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the representative of International Alliance of Women.
Thank you, Madam President, Honorable Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The International Alliance of Women thanks Lebanon for accepting several important recommendations, like the criminalization of marital rape and the commitment to creating a unified civil code in consultation with women's rights organizations and religious leaders. However, we ask Lebanon to reconsider their nationality law and work toward guaranteeing equal citizenship status to women who have started families with non-citizens. We must also reiterate the vulnerable situation of migrant domestic workers, a majority of whom are women. We urge Lebanon to abolish the kafala system and adopt a legally binding labor migration framework that guarantees equal protection and access to justice for migrant domestic workers. The International Alliance of Women is ready to support the Lebanese government in implementing these measures towards safety and equality of all of its women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there further comments? Now I will give the floor to the representative of the International Refugee Assistance Project. You may now comment.
Thank you. Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and distinguished delegates. We appreciate Lebanon's participation in this UPR cycle and commend its strong engagement and collaboration. Yet, we must also express deep concern. Lebanon hosts one of the largest refugee populations relative to its size, and the situation for both refugees and host populations, communities remains particularly dire amid the ongoing economic crisis. In this context, it is troubling that so few recommendations on refugee and migrant rights were raised, and even more concerning that key recommendations, including those calling for legislated asylum safeguards and the abolition of the kafala system, were merely noted. While we welcome Lebanon's acceptance of the recommendation to continue working with the UN agencies to strengthen community-based support, stronger commitments are urgently needed. We urge Lebanon to take decisive steps towards meaningful protection frameworks and to address the structural vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments? This concludes the list of speakers of the stakeholders. I will now give the floor back to Lebanon for their final remarks. Excellency, you have 2 minutes. You may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We are deeply convinced that it is essential to protect human rights through the various international instruments. Nonetheless, promoting human rights must also take into account reality in order to protect the country's credibility. Lebanon has noted some recommendations because they would require significant changes to our legal framework, as well as substantial support and political will, both of which are unlikely to materialize at this time. Measures such as adopting a comprehensive refugee asylum system, abolishing the kafala system, or nationality law would be particularly difficult to achieve in the current fragmented environment. Nonetheless, we pledge our efforts into advancing for these noted recommendations and continuing efforts with international corporations to assess how it's best to implement them. Lastly, we want to thank the President of the Human Rights Council and the fellow delegations part of this UPR cycle for offering their support and their valuable recommendations. Their contribution is greatly appreciated and will be taken into account.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Saroumi for her comments and for Lebanon's participation throughout the UPR process. I now suggest that the Council should adopt a decision on the outcome of the UPR of the Lebanese Republic. Are there any objections? I see none. The outcome is now adopted. We shall now proceed with item 6 of the UPR with the adoption of the Working Group report of the Republic of Rwanda. It is with pleasure that I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Carmen Ciccone, Minister Counselor of the Permanent Mission of Rwanda to the United Nations, to present the general outcome of the Working Group sessions. Your Excellency, I invite you to take the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, distinguished delegates. Rwanda is honored to present its views on the recommendations contained in the final report of the Working Group on its Universal Periodic Review. We reaffirm our unwavering commitment to this cooperative mechanism, which continues to guide our national efforts towards strengthening human rights protection, good governance, and inclusive development. We thank all delegations for their constructive participation during our review and express appreciation for the spirit of partnership in which recommendations were formulated. Rwanda welcomes the adoption of the report and is pleased to present updates on the progress. Rwanda accepted all the recommendations presented from Denmark, Lebanon, Singapore, and Trinidad and Tobago. With reference to recommendation accepted on women's rights and gender equality, Rwanda reiterates its long-lasting commitment to advancing gender equality and combating gender-based violence. Over the past months, we have strengthened labor protection for women, particularly in the agricultural sector, through expanded labor inspection missions and the support of women's cooperatives promoting labor rights awareness. Isanje One-Stop Centers, our flagship survivor center model, have increased staffing and operational capacity, particularly in rural districts. We have launched new gender sensitivity schools modules, updated national witness protection guidelines, and are preparing a leadership mentorship program to support women advancement in public institutions. Taking into account recommendations made to Rwanda on access to justice, judicial reform, and prevention to torture, Rwanda continues to implement comprehensive justice sectors reforms. Community service sentencing for minors offense has been widened to reduce overcrowding and expanded alternatives to detention. Joint inspection by prosecutors and the National Commission for Human Rights have been strengthened to ensure full compliance with legal limits on pretrial detention. We have also improved the conditions in police detention facilities, including sanitation, lighting, and ventilation. Key elements of the Judicial Strategic Plan 2024-2029 have been operationalized, including clear guidance prohibiting the use of evidence obtained through unlawful means. In line with recommendations received, Rwanda has enhanced responses to human trafficking. New anti-trafficking focal points have been trained with Rwanda Investigation Bureau, and community awareness campaigns were implemented in high-risk border districts. Referral mechanism between civil society, shelters, the police, and local authorities have been strengthened to ensure timely support and integration for survivors. For what concerns recommendation on education and protection of vulnerable groups, Rwanda wishes to reaffirm that it prioritizes inclusive access to education for vulnerable children, refugees, and those at risk of dropping out. The past months witnessed the expansion of inclusive education, infrastructure, outreach campaigns to reintegrate out-of-school children, and increased vocational training programs in cooperation with UNHCR to enhance refugee livelihoods. Lastly, administrative procedures for refugee children to enroll in public schools have also been simplified. Rwanda values all recommendations received, including those we were unable to support. Rwanda noted all recommendations from Australia. On cases of enforced disappearance, Rwanda does not support this recommendation, as Rwanda reiterates that existing national mechanisms already ensure accountability and effective investigation where allegations arise. We remain committed to strengthening its justice institutions in line with national priorities. On ethnic identification concerning the Batwa, Rwanda recalls that its constitutional framework prohibits ethnic categorization, ensuring that all citizens are equal before the law. Our national policy does not distinguish citizens by ethnic groups. On Rwanda's commitment to previous declaration under Article 34.6 of the African Charter on Human Rights, on Human and People's Rights, Rwanda maintains the concern that informed its withdrawal of the declaration, particularly regarding the impartiality and independence of the court. On legislation related to LGBTI persons, Rwanda reiterates that no law criminalizes sexual orientation. All persons are protected under the Constitution, and Rwanda remains committed to ensuring equality and non-discrimination while acting within its national values and legal framework. Rwanda remains committed to the UPR process as a tool for dialogue, transparency, and mutual learning. We will continue working diligently with our partners, civil society, and our Rwandans to advance human rights and human dignity for all. Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, the Secretary, for your continuous work. We thank all delegations for their engagement and look forward to ongoing cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the representative of the National Commission for Human Rights. Your Excellency, Ms. Lia Lijun, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President, fellow diggers. On behalf of the National Commission for Human Rights of Rwanda, I wish to thank all states for their constructive engagement during this review. We appreciate the recognition of Rwanda's progress, especially in women's parliamentary representation and in expanding service for survivors of gender-based violence. We also welcome the constructive recommendation of the day. As an NHRI, we value recommendation that support the broadening of women's leadership into high-level executive and judicial roles. and though that strengthen trauma-informed and survival sentence service across all Isangi one-stop consent, including to rural districts. We also note the importance of promoting positive discipline in schools to replace corporal punishment. We reaffirm our commitment to monitoring implementation, advising national institutions and cooperating with all international partners to advance human rights for all in Rwanda. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now give the floor to the observer states to hear their comments about the review of Rwanda. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait for your delegation to be called out. We will start with the delegation of Australia. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Australia thanks Rwanda for its engagement in the UPR process. We note with regret that our recommendations were not accepted. Australia wishes to highlight in particular the situation of the Batwa people. We respect Rwanda's position on national unity, but it doesn't fully reflect the specific historical marginalization the Batwa have faced. As a country that continues to work to address the historical injustices experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, Australia stands ready to share experience and support. Australia also stresses the importance of ensuring practical protection for LGBTI persons. The absence of specific anti-discrimination protection have leaves LGBT individuals vulnerable in practice. Finally, Australia notes that independent observers continue to highlight the issues of enforced disappearances. We urge Rwanda to take further steps on this. Australia remains committed to constructive dialogue and cooperation with Rwanda to advance human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now is the turn of the delegation of Denmark. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you. Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, fellow delegates, Denmark is honored to take the floor and wishes to begin by expressing its sincere appreciations to the delegation of Rwanda for the constructive and fruitful engagement during the Universal Periodic Review Working Group session. We specifically commend Rwanda on its proactive participation and, crucially, for its acceptance of all recommendations put forward by the Kingdom of Denmark. This commitment is a strong testament for a shared and progressive vision for the advancement of human rights. Our recommendations were concentrated on three critical pillars, which we believe are fundamental to continued societal progress: gender equality and women's rights, combating gender-based violence, and torture prevention and detention. Denmark views Rwanda's support for the UPR mechanism as an encouraging demonstration for its dedication to international human rights standards. We sincerely thank Rwanda and look forward to its continued progress in implementing these crucial commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Lebanon. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The Lebanese Republic congratulates Rwanda in its progress since the last review. Our delegation commends the steps taken in combating human trafficking. Specifically, Lebanon asserts that the implementation of community-based campaigns targeting high-risk border districts and the cooperation with civil society shelters can effectively assist in the promotion of security and safety within the country. Similarly, our delegation welcomes the accepted recommendation regarding unhindered access to education. The State of Lebanon reiterates its support of measures that can expand inclusive education facilities, essentially integrating out-of-school children. Our delegation remarks on all the positive efforts undertaken by Rwanda and recommends that it continue working towards a more inclusive and safe educational system for all children. We wish them all the best in their future steps. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Singapore. You may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, fellow delegates, and honorable representatives of the NGO and NHRI. Singapore thanks the delegation of Rwanda for their participation in this UPR and for considering the recommendations mentioned by all states. Singapore recognizes Rwanda's efforts to operationalize elements of the judicial strategy plan with guidance prohibiting unlawfully obtain evidence and enhancing resources for gender-based violence survivors. Demonstrating meaningful progress in judicial reform and women's rights protection, we wish Rwanda every success in continuing to implement the accepted recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Delegation of Trinidad and Tobago, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Trinidad and Tobago wishes to commend Rwanda for the Isenj one-stop centers, increased staffing and operational hours. Trinidad and Tobago further welcomes the updating of the National Witness Protection Guidelines and remarks that further efforts will be required to ensure implementation. Trinidad and Tobago also welcomes the introduction of the Leadership Mentoring Program to support women's representation in public institutions. Trinidad and Tobago also commends the comprehensive measures taken by Rwanda to improve the prevention and support services for victims of trafficking. Trinidad and Tobago also encourages the development of inclusive education facilities nationwide. And finally, Trinidad and Tobago regrets that Rwanda has not considered Trinidad and Tobago's comments made before the adoption of the working group reports to distinguish between formal and de facto inequality, therefore ensuring actual protection for minority groups such as the Batwa people. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I give the floor to the international non-governmental organizations for any comments. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait to be given the floor to speak. I now give the floor to Human Dignity Trust.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished delegates, honorable guests, and respected peers. The Human Dignity Trust would like to commend all of your efforts in facilitating and implementing recommendations to the improvement of human rights, particularly for LGBT individuals. The progression of human rights is never ending. We would like to commend the government of Rwanda for an open discourse about LGBT individuals during this Model UPR. We are, however, saddened that Australia's recommendation to implement legislation against discrimination for LGBT individuals, including the guarantee of due process and the protection against arbitrary detention, was only noted. Although Rwanda's constitution protects people from discrimination, LGBT individuals are not explicitly mentioned, which leaves them vulnerable. While there have been no feasible improvements since the adoption of the Working Group report for LGBT individuals, we want to offer our resources for future projects. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Next is the representative of International Alliance of Women. You may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Honorable Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The International Alliance of Women appreciates Rwanda's legacy on championing women's leadership in public administration for accepting Denmark's recommendation on stronger protections for female agricultural workers and their awareness of the need for stronger mechanisms and tools against gender-based violence. We welcome the prospect of increased maternity leave with expanded coverage to the informal sector. However, we urge Rwanda to consider the impact of increasing maternity benefits without a proper paternity leave, which is currently only 7 days. Equitable parental leave is imperative to ensure that women aren't excluded from executive leadership and pushed into disproportionately shouldering unpaid yet essential care work. Lastly, as highlighted by Australia, recognition of the indigenous status of Batwa women is important due to the fact that they were systematically ejected from their ancestral lands in Rwanda's equatorial forests, and most live in poverty on the outskirts of these protected areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Are there any further comments? This concludes the list of speakers of the stakeholders. I now give the floor back to Rwanda for its final remarks. Your Excellency, you have the floor and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished Secretary, and fellow delegates. Rwanda welcomes all comments and remarks, and we are extremely thankful for the constructive dialogue that this UPR created through cooperation and active engagement. Regarding noted recommendations from Australia and concerning the Batwa people, Rwanda reiterates that our constitution establishes a national identity that rejects the use of ethnic classification, as this division were at the root of tragic history. For this reason, policies cannot be distinguish citizens on the basis of ethnicity, including through targeted legal recognition of specific groups. Concerning LGBTI rights, Rwanda reiterates that discrimination of any kind is prohibited under Article 16 of our Constitution, which guarantees equality for all persons. No law in Rwanda criminalizes sexual orientation, and all individuals are protected under our Constitution. Concerning enforced disappearance, Rwanda reiterates that strong national mechanism already exists to prevent, investigate, and prosecute any lawful deprivation of liberty. For what concerns the development of inclusive education in our school vulnerable groups from Trinidad and Tobago and Lebanon, we stay committed to develop our educational system to ensure primary education for all individuals, including those belonging to vulnerable groups. Rwanda wishes to express its sincere appreciation to the civil society actors that engage with us throughout this UPR cycle. Their expertise has enriched our dialogue, and Rwanda remains committed to continue collaboration with all relevant stakeholders during the process of further implementation. Thank you, fellow delegates, for your cooperation and insights that are very strongly valued. Rwanda wishes to thank Madam President, Vice President, and all the distinguished secretary. And we thank all the delegations for all the cooperation, dialogue, and involvement. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Chikone for her comments and for Rwanda's participation throughout the UPR process. I now suggest that the Council should adopt a decision on the outcome of the UPR of the Republic of Rwanda. Are there any objections? If there are no objections, the outcome is now adopted. We shall now proceed with item 6 of UPR with the adoption of the Working Group Report of the Republic of Singapore. It is with pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Zhang Rui, Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Singapore to the United Nations Office in Geneva, to present the general outcome of the Working Group sessions. Your Excellency, I invite you to take the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, fellow delegates, distinguished representative of social society. Good afternoon to all of you. Let me begin by conveying Singapore's appreciation to the Secretariat and our Troika for their invaluable support and advice throughout the course of our UPR cycle. Let me also thank our fellow states and members of social society for sharing their perspectives and recommendations. We were deeply humbled by the number of participants that spoke during our review in November and for their constructive and encouraging words. We appreciate the positive feedback and the constructive recommendations for member states on Singapore's effort to build a human rights-centered governance framework, especially from those who submitted advanced written questions. The UPR mechanism not only reveals each state's human rights record, but also promotes dialogue among stakeholders and foster understanding of different approaches to realizing human rights. Singapore has engaged in each UPR cycle with great sincerity and seriousness. The UPR allows us to reflect on our human rights journey, engage constructively with our partners and peers, and share our experiences. Singapore's principled approach to human rights. Madam President, Madam Vice President, Singapore is committed to advance human rights in practical and outcome-based manner, in full consideration of our multiracial, multi-religious, and historically unique context. We adopt a pragmatic resource-oriented approach to fulfill our human rights obligations. Our approach is guided by two core principles. First, the realization of human rights must respect and accommodate the country's cultural, social, economic, and historical circumstances. Second, the rule of law is the fundamental basis for the protection and promotion of human rights recommendations. During this cycle of review, Singapore is pleased to be able to support 8 out of 13 recommendations received, and we noted and partially accept 5. Singapore thanks all delegations for their constructive engagement. From Trinidad and Tobago, we continue advising gender equality and strengthening women leadership. From Lebanon and Trinidad and Tobago, we enhance cross-border cooperation against trafficking and expand protection for victims. From Rwanda, we improve migrant worker support mechanisms and strengthen monitoring of school and child care institutions to safeguard children. From Lebanon, we also reinforce law enforcement training to better protect women and advanced our comprehensive approach to preventing and rehabilitating radicalization. Singapore remains committed to first an inclusive, safe, and resilient society. Now, please allow me to highlight key areas. For recommendations, we have noted Singapore already has legislation and policies that address their underlying objective in a way that best suit our unique social and cultural context. For example, on LGBTI issues, Singapore has decriminalized consensual adult same-sex relations and promotion fair, respectful, and dignified treatment in public services, employment, and healthcare. We are also strengthening education and community initiative to foster inclusion, enhance understanding, and reduce procedures. We have also not supported recommendations, and we cannot implement recommendations which are not appropriate in our national context. Looking ahead, I can assure you that Singapore will continue to review our policies to ensure that they are fit for purpose. The context may change and our challenges may evolve, but our objective of achieving better outcomes for our people will remain constant. Madam President, Madam Vice President, I would like to pause now to hear from fellow states and civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to the observer states to hear their comments regarding the review of Singapore. Each state will have 1 minute. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait for your delegation to be called out. We will start with the delegation of Australia. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Australia thanks Singapore for its continued engagement with the UPR process and acknowledges the constructive dialogue between our two countries. Australia and Singapore share a strong partnership, and we offer our comments today in that same spirit of cooperation. On Australia's recommendation about anti-discrimination protection for LGBTI persons, we welcome Singapore's affirmation that all people are equal before the law. At the same time, we encourage consideration of more explicit safeguards against discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. On capital punishment, Australia recognizes Singapore's commitment to public safety, but reiterates our opposition to death penalty in all circumstances. Australia values its close relationship with Singapore and remains ready to share experience and engage constructively as both our countries work to advance human rights and inclusive societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now is the turn of the delegation of Denmark. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you. Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. The delegates of Denmark were honored to be members of the Troika to Singapore during Universal Periodic Review Working Group sessions and wish to express its sincere appreciation to the delegation of Singapore for its cooperation. We particularly commend Singapore for the constructive and open spirit in which they engaged with recommendations presented by fellow state delegates. However, Denmark acknowledges the decision by Singapore to note the recommendations put forth by our delegation. We would like to encourage the government of Singapore to maintain their already taken positive trajectory by giving further careful consideration to the possibility of accepting these noted recommendations ahead of the next UPR cycle. We believe that integrating these suggestions would further strengthen Singapore's human rights framework. Finally, we express our firm hope that the working group report and its addendum concerning the review of Singapore will be adopted successfully. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Lebanon. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The Lebanese Republic welcomes the delegation of Singapore and commends its acceptance of our recommendations. Specifically, our delegation commends the continuation of intelligence sharing and regional and international cooperation to protect victims of trafficking. Lebanon also welcomes Singapore's commitment to countering violent extremism, and alongside measures such as public outreach, rehabilitation, and reintegration programs, we hope to see larger initiatives that center around prevention of radicalization of the population through education, opportunities, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Rwanda. You may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. Rwanda welcomes the delegation of Singapore and commends its active engagement throughout the UPR process. We appreciate the comprehensive update provided, including progress on strengthening support for migrant workers, enhancing protection for children, and advancing women's participation in public life. Rwanda acknowledges Singapore's continued efforts to review its legislation in light of evolving social and economic realities. We encourage Singapore to continue considering ways to further enhance legal safeguards and access to justice, in line with its national priorities. We also encourage the government to continue expanding data collection in areas such as trafficking, labor protection, and social support mechanisms, as this greatly facilitates implementation and monitoring. Finally, Rwanda welcomes Singapore's continued cooperation with stakeholders and encourages sustained inclusive dialogue in the follow-up process. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you. Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates, Trinidad and Tobago wishes to welcome Singapore for accepting our recommendations to enhance gender parity and continue combating human trafficking. However, Trinidad and Tobago wishes to remark and regret the absence of new measures taken on the said matters since the adoption of the working group report. We thank Singapore for the constructive dialogue and wish it the best for the rest of the implementation phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I give the floor to the international non-governmental organizations for any comments. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait to be given the floor to speak. Please note that you will have 1 minute to speak. I now give the floor to the delegation of Human Dignity Trust.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished delegates, honorable guests, and respected peers. The Human Dignity Trust would like to commend all of your efforts in facilitating and implementing recommendations to the improvement of human rights, particularly for LGBT individuals. The progression of human rights is never ending. We would like to commend the government of Singapore for an open discourse about LGBT individuals during this model UPR. We are, however, saddened that Australia's and Denmark's recommendations to adopt anti-discrimination legislation regarding LGBT individuals were only noted, and that Australia's recommendation to amend constitutional provisions that limit the recognition of same-sex relationships was simply noted. There are still no specific laws prohibiting the discrimination of LGBT individuals, and there have been no feasible improvements since the adoption of the Working Group report for LGBT individuals. We want to again offer our resources for future projects. We urge all of you to be part of the continuous improvement of human rights. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Are there any further comments? This concludes the list of speakers and stakeholders. I now give the floor back to Singapore for their final remarks. Excellency, you have 2 minutes. You may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed secretariats, fellow delegates, distinguished representatives of social society. I would like to thank all member states and representatives from social society for sharing their perspectives and constructive feedback on a variety of issues. Australia and Denmark and INGO raised important points to the death penalty and LGBTI issues. Singapore notes that international law does not prohibit the death penalty, and each state has the sovereign right to determine its own laws. In Singapore, it's applied only for the most serious crimes and serves as an effective deterrent with regular reviews to ensure fairness and relevance. On LGBTI matters, the repeal of Section 377A marked meaningful progress, and we reject all forms of discrimination or harm. Given our general conservative society, we will continue to approach this issue carefully to preserve social cohesion. I'm proud to say that we have come a long way since our independence in 1965. Today, Singapore ranks 9th on the 2024 UN Human Development Index and 8th on the UN Gender Equality Index, and is placed first in the Asian Pacific region. But we don't intend to stop here. We remain fully cognizant and that the improvement of human rights is an ongoing process, and our approach must continue to evolve. Esteemed Secretariat, fellow delegates, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, fellow delegates, thank you very much for your time and active participation today. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Zhang Rui for her comments and for Singapore's participation throughout the UPR process. I now suggest that the Council should adopt the decision on the outcome of the UPR of the Republic of Singapore. Are there any objections? I see none. The outcome is adopted. We shall now continue with item 6 of the UPR with the adoption of the Working Group Report of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. It is with pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Ashishka Rakshaw, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the United Nations Office at Geneva, to present the general outcome of the working group sessions. Your Excellency, I invite you to take the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, Excellencies, distinguished members of the working group, ladies and gentlemen. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago approaches this stage of the Universal Periodic Review with a firm sense of purpose. Our nation is shaped by a long-standing belief that justice, dignity, and equality must be protected through aspiration and careful, steady reform. Since the last UPR, we have undertaken significant transformation of our criminal justice system and undergone a modernization of procedures and strengthening of oversight. These reforms have never been cosmetic. These are the result of deliberate choices made time and again to align our institutions with evolving needs of people and with the highest standards of human rights. It is in this spirit that Trinidad and Tobago stands at another crucial threshold. We are entering a period of constitutional reform that seeks to ensure that our foundational legal framework remains responsive to the realities of the modern democratic society. This process reaffirms our faith in the Constitution, which has long served as an anchor for our commitment to the rule of law. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is honored to participate in this session of the adoption of the outcome for our 4th cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago expresses its sincere appreciation to the working group, all states engaged constructively during our review, and especially to the members of the Troika from the Republic of Lebanon for their guidance and cooperation through this process. We have carefully considered each of the 13 recommendations received during this interactive dialogue and accepted 7, noted 3, and taken 3 for further consideration. Madam President, With respect to the recommendations accepted, allow me to highlight several areas of active implementation. The government continues to expand community-based crime prevention initiatives, including strengthened partnerships with civil society, youth organizations, and local leaders. We are also exploring the establishment of a Community Resilience Fellows program aimed at training community members in conflict mediation, mentorship, and social intervention techniques. We are also enhancing human rights training with law enforcement through standardized modules, now fully incorporated into the police academy curriculum, and expanded into service training. The Office of the Prime Minister has also in the past months considered the introduction of an independent panel for the use of force review and the adoption of digital simulation tools. We welcome the recommendation made by the Republic of Lebanon to scale up disaster risk prediction efforts. In this regard, the government is examining the development of a community flood wardens policy informed by the recommendations by the civil society. Further, we have continued to advance the adoption and phased implementation of the Persons with Disabilities Bill. On the recommendations extended by the Republic of Singapore, we have continued to reinforce our national response to gender-based violence. The government is improving survival-focused services and integrating standardized protocols. We are also actively participating in the UN Women Caribbean Women Count program. With respect to women's leadership, Trinidad and Tobago continues to support training, mentorship, and gender-inclusive recruitment processes. We are reviewing the establishment of a Women in Sustainable Development Fellowship, which would support women's participation further. Regarding the recommendations we noted, on refugee protection and asylum procedures, following the closure of the UNHCR office in Trinidad and Tobago in 2025, a national registration policy has been developed. There are also discussions for a new migration policy to reflect contemporary realities. The matter of ratification of the Convention Against Torture and the establishment of a national preventive mechanism remains under active review as we continue to pursue ongoing reforms in our justice administration and law enforcement. Trinidad and Tobago further notes that recommendations considering detention conditions and rehabilitation exist. On recommendations relating to discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, the government reaffirms its commitment to follow due process in assessing potential changes to the legislative framework. Madam President, Trinidad and Tobago reaffirms its commitment to the Universal Periodic Review as a cooperative mechanism that supports both national reflection and shared international progress. We will continue to engage with the Human Rights Council, treaty bodies, regional partners, and civil society as we advance implementations of the recommendations accepted during this cycle. I express once again our gratitude to the Troika, the working group, and all delegations for their constructive engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now give the floor to the observer states to hear their comments regarding the review of Trinidad and Tobago. Each state will have 1 minute. For this segment, please raise your placards if you wish to comment and wait for your delegation to be called out. We will start with the delegation of Australia. Please, Your Excellency, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Australia thanks Trinidad and Tobago for its constructive engagement with the UPR process. Australia notes that 2 of our recommendations remain under further consideration. Firstly, we would like to reiterate our opposition to death penalty in all circumstances and encourage Trinidad and Tobago to consider step forward a moratorium as a part of its ongoing review. Secondly, we highlight the importance of ensuring equality and dignity for all persons. Australia remains committed to constructive dialogue and stands ready to share experiences as Trinidad and Tobago continue its effort to strengthen human rights protections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. Denmark thanks Trinidad and Tobago for its active engagement in the UPR and for the recommendations it addressed to Denmark, both of which we have accepted and will work to implement. In the same cooperative spirit, Denmark notes with regret that none of our recommendations to Trinidad and Tobago were accepted, with one taken under further consideration and other noted. We encourage Trinidad and Tobago to continue reflecting on these issues, in particular ratification of the Convention Against Torture and steps towards abolition of the mandatory death penalty. As such reforms would further reinforce the impact and credibility of its advocacy here in Geneva, here in Padova. To this regard, we value Trinidad and Tobago's active voice on a wide range of human rights issued to this council, including especially asylum, refugee legislation and migrant protection, detention and criminal justice, gender equality reforms, rights of marginalized groups, and non-discriminations. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Lebanon. You may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, and fellow delegates. The Lebanese Republic welcomes the progress achieved by Trinidad and Tobago since its last review. Our delegation commends the steps taken to expand community-based crime prevention programs and urges the state to continue such efforts. Lebanon commends the enhancement of human rights-focused law enforcement training and recommends that Trinidad and Tobago accelerate the implementation of the Independent Use of Force Review Panel and of the Digital Scenario Training System to promote just law enforcement practices. Our delegation also welcomes the steps taken to establish a Women in Sustainable Development Fellowship, however, remains concerned on whether it sufficiently addresses the gravity of issues surrounding climate change and environmental degradation. We urge Trinidad and Tobago to adopt more emergent and expansive measures on such issues, therefore. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now give the floor to the delegation of Rwanda. Your Excellency, you may now comment.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretary, and fellow delegates. Rwanda warmly welcomes the presentation of Trinidad and Tobago and commends the constructive manner in which it engaged throughout the Universal Periodic Review process. We appreciate the steps taken to advance the rights of persons with disabilities, strengthen the response to gender-based violence, and enhance community-based security. We take note of the recommendations that remain under consideration and encourage the government to continue its review of these matters, including ongoing discussions on treaty ratification, migration frameworks, and justice sector reforms. We wish Trinidad and Tobago continued success in the implementation phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Delegation of Singapore, you may now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, esteemed Secretariat, fellow delegates, and honorable representatives of the civil society. Singapore welcomes Trinidad and Tobago's positive response to our recommendations and detailed implementation reporting. We are pleased that both our recommendations on supporting female participation in decisive positions and expanding gender-responsive training were accepted and are being implemented. Our delegations also welcome this progress and encourage Trinidad and Tobago's continued efforts toward gender equality and inclusive development. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I give the floor to the INGOs for any comments. For this segment, please raise your placard if you wish to comment and wait to be given the floor to speak. Please note that you will have 1 minute. I now give the floor to Friends of the Earth International.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished Vice President, esteemed Secretary, honorable delegates, and representatives of member states. Friends of the Earth International want to thank Trinidad and Tobago for the progress made, particularly for accepting Singapore's recommendation to enhance women participation in the energy sector. This demonstrates a strong commitment to gender equality and a more inclusive workforce. We also thank Singapore for its work. We were honored to work with you. Friends of the Earth International also want to show gratitude to Trinidad and Tobago for supporting the recommendation noted by the delegation of Australia, suggesting investment in renewable energy for a green transition. By investing in renewable alternatives and diversifying the energy mix, Trinidad and Tobago has already achieved important progress, and Friends of the Earth International will remain committed to constructive engagement, and we look forward to continuing cooperation to ensure gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is a representative of Human Dignity Trust.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Vice President, distinguished delegates. The Human Dignity Trust would like to commend all of your efforts in facilitating and implementing recommendations to the improvement of human rights, particularly for LGBT individuals. The progression of human rights is never ending. We would like to commend the government of Trinidad and Tobago for an open discourse about LGBT individuals during this Model UPR. We are, however, saddened that Australia's recommendation to amend the Equal Opportunity Act is only under further consideration. We hope the due process and undertaking of the constitutional reform necessary to improve the legal standing of LGBT individuals in Trinidad and Tobago will commence soon, as there have been no feasible improvements since the adoption of the Working Group report for LGBT individuals. We want to again offer our resources for future projects. We urge all of you to be part of the continuous improvement of human rights and remember that changing laws is changing lives. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments? This concludes the list of speakers of the stakeholders. I now give the floor back to Trinidad and Tobago for their final remarks. Your Excellency, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you to all the fellow delegates of the working group for their remarks and also the members of the civil society organizations. As we bring this session to a close, Trinidad and Tobago reaffirms that the true measure of the state's commitment to human rights is not in the words it delivers in these chambers, but in the behavior it demonstrates at home. Through its institutions, its reforms, and willingness to evolve, Trinidad and Tobago has shown across successive UPR cycles that our approach is one of steady, deliberate progress. In response to the remarks made on the abolition of death penalty, we stress that the topic is being reviewed. The government also reaffirms its commitment to constitutional reform. The death penalty, further, has not been applied since 1999, and its application is being reviewed at several court levels. Additionally, in the case of Pratt and Morgan, the Privy Council has decided that all death sentences be delayed by 5 years and commuted to life imprisonment. We welcome the support from the Commonwealth of Australia and look forward to engaging with them following internal reforms in the Republic on the rights of LGBTQI persons. With respect to remarks on the ratification of the Convention Against Torture, Trinidad and Tobago notes that these recommendations and confirms that the matter remains under active review. Our legal framework already prohibits torture and other forms of ill treatment, and significant reforms are already underway. We would also like to stress that we remain engaged with civil society to develop community-led and informed solutions like the currently proposed Flood Wardens program. And on renewable energy, we continue to invest in the shift towards green hydrogen and have welcomed multiple partnerships to further climate adaptation. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago remains committed to ensuring that our reforms reflect both the needs of our people and the values that define our democratic traditions. We extend our sincere appreciation to the Chair, the Working Group, Troika, and all the delegations for their engagement. We will continue to act in a manner befitting a state that strives consistently to strengthen the protection of human rights for all. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Raga for her comments and for Trinidad and Tobago's participation throughout the UPR process. I now suggest that the Council should adopt a decision on the outcome of the UPR of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Are there any objections? If there is none, the outcome is now adopted. With the adoption of the outcome for the UPR of Trinidad and Tobago, we have concluded the review and approval of the outcomes of the UPR for the 6 states under review during the Padova Model UPR. Thank you, Your Excellencies, for your speeches and for the fruitful participation in the whole UPR process. I now propose that the Council adopt the decision on the outcomes of the Universal Periodic Review of Australia, Denmark, Lebanon, Rwanda, Singapore, and Trinidad and Tobago. Are there any further comments or questions to be made from the floor? Are there any objections? I see no objections. The decision is adopted. The The regular session of the Human Rights Council, item 6, is now closed. We will now take an hour break before we announce this year's awards. Before you all leave the room, all participants are invited to fill in the form that is being projected on the screen. Please vote according to your opinion for the best team according to participants. You will have 3 minutes to decide. You cannot vote for your own team, but the best performing team throughout the entire simulation according to your judgment. Welcome back to all participants. Welcome back to all participants, our distinguished guests, and our viewers from home. What an enriching experience this has been. First of all, I would like to thank all participants for your participation and your performances these days. You assumed your roles professionally and demonstrated proficiency and good knowledge of human rights systems and issues. You all actively participated in the training sessions and interacted amongst each other during lobbying and during the interactive dialogue. On behalf of the Padova Model UPR Secretariat, we are proud of your work and we thank you for your interest in applying to the model this year. We hope to have met your expectations as well. I now declare the award and the closing ceremony officially open. To start this closing ceremony, I would like to welcome Mr. Mohamed Khair, Human Rights Officer at the Human Rights Council, and we invite him for his final remarks on the UPR model. You can come to the
I'm a bit intimidated at being at the podium. Could hide under the table, but no, thank you so much for having me here for the second year in a row. Thank you also to all the members of the Secretariat for all the wonderful work that you're doing. Unfortunately, I was not able to follow all the sessions. I was here only for part, but I was really, really impressed by the quality of the analysis that you made, the presentations you gave, the backroom negotiations that was taking place all over. I was trying to spy and overhear every now and again. And I'm just really, really impressed by the quality of knowledge, by the intelligence that I could, sift through during the conversations we've been having also outside of this room. And looking back at my own, period as a student, when I did my master's about 150 years ago, um, I was, I left that master's having been trained very thoroughly on the theory of international criminal law, international humanitarian law, the bases of all these organizations, their mandates. However, when I then stepped into the professional experience as intern or as a junior staff, I was shocked a little bit when I was facing the reality, because then I realized a lot of the challenges that we face collectively are very, very different from just the theory. The theory is important. The theory should be studied, should be learned, but then nobody really explains to you how do you manage to mediate between two sides that are not intent on finding an agreement, or if you are in the corridors of the UPR, how do you, working with the Troika, try to persuade a state to accept more recommendations rather than less? If you are working in the field somewhere, how do you get people to talk to you? How do you get people to trust you? Ultimately, unless you're a suspect who's summoned, all these reports that you have brilliantly represented and presented usually are based on information gathered by NGOs or UN staff members in very remote parts of the world at times, in which people had to go and talk to somebody they've never met, somebody who doesn't know them. And how do you get that person to trust you? How do you get that person to open up and share experiences and provide testimonies and give you the information that you need to be able to do your information gathering, your analysis, your reports? And only at the final stage are these things discussed at the Human Rights Council, at the General Assembly, or during the UPR mechanism, etc. These are things that nobody really can teach you easily in schools, in the masters. Judgment is something that one can only develop through experience and exposure. And what I like about this simulation is I think that it comprises as much as possible the different phases that most of you who will choose to work in this field will be experiencing, whether it's negotiating with NGOs, with other governments, whether it's confronting, whether it's in the case of, for example, those who are representing governments, they must be aware of the fact that you're under pressure as a government. You're going to have different currents within your own country that are pushing in different directions. When you come to the council, you need to make sure that you're also responding largely to an internal audience, not only an international audience. And I think that when you represent NGOs, governments in a mechanism such as this one, it really triggers that thought process, And so when I did not have the chance to speak to anyone, but those that I've had the luck of speaking with really communicated this to me. Like, I really understood how deeply you were thinking about some issues, and based on the questions that were delivered, I also understand that, a lot of these complexities are being absorbed by all of you, and that makes me hopeful. During some of our conversations, a lot of the questions centered on what can we do to make things better? What can we do to change the general orientation that the world appears to be moving towards now? I perceive this worry as well, and it's a worry that everybody has. I think the professor would know it as well from having worked also at the council and with diplomats and with NGOs, and all of you and all of us who work in the UN also feel this. So the message I want to leave you with, in addition to congratulating you for the great work that you have done, is a little bit one of hope, because I sense that sometimes some of us, some of you, are worried about the future, are worried about what is to come. And what I personally do is I try to think back at the people that inspired me, you know, whether it's people that I've known, some of my bosses or teachers, whether it's those larger than life historical figures like Gandhi, like Martin Luther King, like Václav Havel, whomever you look up to. And if you go through their experiences, you will find that the challenges they were facing, the odds they were running against, were much, much greater than what we are running against now. We have an infrastructure. It's being tarnished somehow, but it exists. It's been built over decades of really strong sacrifices by entire generations of people around the world. This is not going to disappear. It might be weakened. It might suffer a setback. But when I engage with you and others like you in different countries, I'm encouraged and I'm reassured that the system is not on the brink of collapse. It's being challenged. We are going through a phase. And I would like, in response to some of the questions and chats that we had yesterday and today, I would like to leave you with this message of hope that hopefully, and I am 100% convinced of it, we're going through a difficult phase, but you guys, your generation, your determination will help us overcome these challenges and get the world back on a track where diplomacy, human rights, human dignity come at the center of our policies and of our orientation. So I just wanted to leave you with this message, and thank you so much for you know, your kindness and for inviting me here and for all the wonderful conversations that we had. I also wanted to thank the different members of the organizing party, the Human Rights Center, and myself wanted to express my heartfelt gratitude for exceptional work in organizing this year's Padova Model UPR. Your dedication and hard work since February have resulted in an outstanding simulation that has provided participants with an invaluable understanding of the UN's Universal Periodic Review process. As international students, you've done an amazing job in creating this immersive academic experience. Your efforts have not only enhanced our knowledge of human rights mechanisms, but also fostered a spirit of global citizenship among all participants. Your commitment to excellence and attention to detail have made this event truly memorable. Thank you for your tireless efforts in making the Padova Model UPR a success. And I'd like to mention the names of the Secretariat: Valentina Beltran, Natalia Michelle Aguirre, Silvia Giuliana Vega, Federica Napoleoni, Benedetta Rose Artolli, Giovanna Aguiar, Bianca De Zoppa, Maria Sarkis, Camila Veasco, Ronja Marie Aust, Francesca Crescente, and Bianca Balden. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We just want to thank you once again for your constant support throughout the simulation process. I speak on behalf of the whole of the Secretariat in thanking you for your feedback, help, and support. We would also like to welcome and thank Professor Oberleitner from the University of Graz, who is joining us. Professor, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you so much. I'm happy to improvise, of course, which one should never do in formal settings as these. One of the most important things in preparation we have told is do not improvise, read the script. There is no script. Thank you for the Secretariat. Thank you to the University of Padova and its Human Rights Center, students, professors, and everyone working here for doing this. I think it's extremely important, both from an academic perspective and for the future of human rights from an academic perspective, because as has been pointed out, this is a learning experience for everyone involved, I think, whether or not you wish to pursue a career in human rights diplomacy or an academic career. I think you have learned things along the way. I'm very sure you have learned unexpected things probably, things you wouldn't think are the case in the world of multilateral diplomacy. And I think you will remember these days, not just because you had wonderful encounters with colleagues, but also because it may have changed the track of your thinking, the track of your working style, the approach to timekeeping, and other things that I think are important in an exercise like that. But beyond that, I think it's also extremely valuable in times as these to have this kind of experience. Everything is under threat and everything is under pressure. Human rights are under pressure. And of course, you are also here, whatever your position as a state may have been, to defend human rights at the end of the day in your personal capacity. But beyond that, you see that multilateralism and diplomacy is under pressure. We are so delighted that Mohammed could join us here from Geneva, which is not obvious because the United Nations has very little money these days to travel, which is obnoxious if you think about it, that the little money that is given to the UN system in human rights is shrinking. And even diplomacy is under threat. Diplomacy is changing dramatically and moving from the kind of multilateral encounter based on interests and values to a kind of transactional exercise in doing business on a larger scale. And I think this is very important for you also to understand where you position yourself in multilateral human rights diplomacy and whether there is and continues to be such a thing as multilateral human rights diplomacy. So this is very valuable. I think this is an exercise that is extremely important. We are so grateful to everyone, most of all the Secretariat. Congratulations to your fantastic work. Congratulations to all the states, NGOs, NHRIs. I've been watching you secretly from the next door over there, from the next room. You did a fantastic job. It was fantastic listening to you. I have no doubt that I do express the same hope that Mohammed has expressed, that the next generation of human rights diplomacy is on its way. Thank you.
Before we announce the winners, we would like to acknowledge everyone's participation. Therefore, please, when your team is called out, come to the front to receive your participation certificate and a tote bag from the University of Padua merchandise store. We will start with the INGOs teams. First, Friends of the Earth International. Please come to the front. You call Friends of the Earth International. Then, the Human Dignity Trust. The International Alliance of Women, please come to the front. And last but not least, for INGOs, the International Refugee Assistance Project. Now we shall proceed with the National Human Rights Institutions. Please, the Australian Human Rights Institute, walk to the front. Then the Danish Institute for Human Rights. Then the Human Rights Commission of Lebanon. And again, last but not for importance, the Rwandan Human Rights Commission. We shall proceed with the delegations of states. The Commonwealth of Australia, please come up to the front. Then the Kingdom of Denmark. And now the Republic of Lebanon. The Republic of Rwanda. The Republic of Singapore. And last but not least among the states, Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. Now, before we announce the winners, I would like to remind you that on the basis of the evaluation pointing system elaborated by the Secretariat on both oral and written contributions, teams with an outstanding performance will be awarded the following awards: Best State Under Review, Best Recommending State, Best INGO Delegation, and Best NHRI Delegation Awards. And lastly, between the participants, the best performing team according to participants was decided. The time has come. We will now announce the winners of this year's Padova Model UPR. Only the first place will get the award, and if your team is a first place winner, please come to the podium. We will start with the Best State Under Review Award.
For the best state under review, the third place goes to the Republic of Singapore.
Second place is a tie, and it goes to both Denmark and Lebanon.
The first place for the best state under review goes to Trinidad and Tobago.
Congratulations.
This team has displayed a profound knowledge of the national human rights issues of the state they represented, exhibited a synchronized team strategy, and approached the respective state critically, realistically, and in a diplomatically authentic way, but in addressing questions in the recommendation decision-making process and in the addendum. Congratulations.
For the Best Recommending State Award, the third place, once again a tie, goes to Singapore and Australia.
The second place goes to Lebanon.
The best recommending state is Trinidad and Tobago. This team has displayed a profound knowledge of the national human rights issues of the state they represented and the states they reviewed, expressed themselves realistically and in a diplomatically authentic way during the interactive dialogues and lobbying, professionally performed speeches and comments, and professionally drafted the required documents. Congratulations.
Now, moving on to the best INGO delegation, the second place goes to Human Dignity Trust.
The best INGO delegation is Friends of the Earth International. This team has adequately represented their INGO during lobbying, the pre-session, and the item 6. They have demonstrated a good knowledge of the national human rights issues of the... Sorry? They have demonstrated a good knowledge of the work done by the international non-governmental organization that they have represented. Congratulations.
Now, for the best NHRI delegation, the second place goes to the Australian Human Rights Institute. Well, the best NHRI delegation is the Danish Institute for Human Rights.
You're going to be leaving with a lot more stuff than you extra space in your bucket. Congratulations.
This team has accurately represented their NHRI during lobbying, the procession, and the item 6. They have demonstrated a good knowledge of the national human rights issues in the written submission and an exceptional understanding of human rights advocacy during the simulation. Congratulations.
For the best performing team according to participants, I am pleased to announce that the best performing team is the Lebanese National Human Rights Commission. Yeah, come to the podium. Congratulations, everyone. Congratulations to both winners and participants in presence and on Zoom that have contributed to make this year's Padova Model UPR possible. A special thanks to all the members of the Secretariat, to the collaborators from the Human Rights Center of the University of Padova, the catering service from Isola di Caprera, Professor De Stefani, the amazing support from the UPR Info and the UPR branch of Geneva. We would like to inform all the participants of this year's Padova Model UPR that if you wish, you can act as Secretariat for the 2026 edition. It's an incredible opportunity in order to capture a different perspective of the days we have all spent together and the work required in order for the smooth fruition of the simulation. The Padova Model UPR 2025 is now officially closed. Thank you all and have a good afternoon. No.
So now the most important moment. I really wanted to thank myself and the Human Rights Center, really wanted to thank you, the Secretariat, for the amazing work that they carried out for the past 9 months. They started working in February and they put a lot of effort in making this happen. So a big applause goes to them. So now it's your turn for getting your certificate. I'm gonna call to the podium Bianca. Francesca. Benedetta. Congrats. Giovanna. Thank you. Maria. Thank you. Ronia. Valentina. Juli. Thank you. And Natalia. And Camilla. And now the Padova Model UPR is officially concluded. Now lunch break for everyone is waiting for us outside.